This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome to the Moonlight Graham Show, where we celebrate the role players and the underdogs in sports. And today on the podcast, we are talking pickleball. We've done 274 episodes of the Moonlight Graham Show, and we've never done an episode on pickleball. Now, pickleball, it's a sport that's been around for a long time. It is exploding in popularity right now. I started playing pickleball about 6 years ago, and the first couple of times I played it, I'll be honest, I thought it was a sport for old people, and I was a little bit embarrassed to play it. And still, if you talk to my dad today, my dad will not go anywhere near a pickleball court because he thinks it's for the elderly. But the more I played it, the better I got, the more fun I had, and I love the sport of pickleball. Now, when I first started playing, I thought I was pretty good because I was playing against people 20 years older than me. And it probably took me maybe 2 or 3 months before anybody even beat me. Every time I stepped on a court, I would win. And I was playing against guys that are, like I said, 20 years older than I was. And I thought I was God's gift to pickleball. And shortly after that, I got a partner. We were just doing the double scene around Des Moines, beating everybody that we played against. And so we're like, hey, we should play in a pickleball tournament. So we entered ourselves in a pickleball tournament. Of course, we entered ourselves into the top division, the top competitive division in that pickleball tournament. And lo and behold, we got beat so bad in that pickleball tournament that it's probably the worst I've ever been beat in any sport ever. And when I say we got beat bad, we played our first game in that pickleball tournament. We played against two guys who looked like they just got done playing at Wimbledon. They walked into the tournament. Both of them were sponsored head to toe in pickleball gear. And the way pickleball works is one team will start with the serve, and then after they lose a point, the other team gets to serve. Both players, player A and player B, will serve before the serve goes back to the other team. Well, in our first game in that pickleball tournament, we did not even get to serve because the other team scored all 15 points of the game, and we never even broke their serve. They beat us 15-0. I've never been beaten in any sport that bad. So after that, I started playing a lot because I was motivated. I was embarrassed. I played a lot of pickleball. I got a lot better. Me and my partner, Sean O'Hare, who's been on the podcast, we started getting into another pickleball tournament. That one, we played a lot better. We held our own. We won more than we lost, but we still were pretty far away from being at the top tier. So over the next couple of years after that, I was playing like 3 to 5 times a week pretty seriously. And I got to the point where I felt like I could play with the best players in Des Moines. And I was beating some of the good players, some of the guys that, claimed to be pickleball professionals. I felt like I was on par with those guys. Well, life happens, and haven't played a lot in the last couple of years because the kids came. But it is a sport that I think of fondly. And if I went back out and played today, I'd probably get my butt handed to me because it's also a sport that you got to play a lot. It's a game that requires a lot of touch, a lot of feel, and it's a lot of fun. I believe doubles is a much better game than singles, but we've never talked about it here on the podcast, and it's something that's been a passion of mine for, 5+ years now. So our moonlighter for today is a guy by the name of Chris Rossi out of Denver, Colorado, who might be the most passionate pickleball guy that I've ever met. He himself is a 5.0 pickleball player, so he is at that pro level. I never got to the 5.0 level. I was kind of always in the 4 or 5. If you're a pickleball person, you know what that means. But Chris is coming on the podcast. I want to talk pickleball, about where the sport started, where it's going, and where it is today. We've seen a lot in the news that guys like Kevin Durant, LeBron James, they now own pickleball teams. There's a lot of money pouring into that sport right now. So I think it's timely to talk about the sport of pickleball. So here we are. Enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Chris Rossi.
Moonlighters, are you or someone you know moving down to Kansas City? Well, if you are, the one realtor that we trust and that you need to be calling is the great Brian Samvig. As you well know, Brian Sandvik is our producer here on the podcast, and there is not a better residential real estate advisor down in the Kansas City marketplace than Brian Sandvik. Call Brian Sandvik, shoot him a text. Hey, DM us on social media. We'll get you connected with Brian if you can't find him on all the socials, but he is there and he is active, and he is your Kansas City realtor, so give him a call.
Chris Rossi, we've done 274 episodes on the Moonlight Graham Show. This is our first pickleball episode, and you are our pickleball guest. Why did we bring you in for the pickleball guest? Why Chris Rossi in pickleball?
Well, I'm an absolute addict, and I have been for 5 years. Everybody's got their own journey in pickleball. And I feel like I was way ahead of the curve, not ahead of the curve, but both of my parents were phys ed teachers. And my mom has been teaching pickleball since 1983. And once I got into it, I thought it was just a Rossi thing. And then I moved out to Denver and just realized this was 2018. For the last 4 years, I've just had a pulse on the pickleball industry in every way, shape, or form, more than just the sport. I just see the benefits and the social connections, and my entire life is now, for the last 4 years, been pickleball. And no friend of mine, everybody that knows me is always like, how's your pickleball stuff doing? And it's just, I'm just in love with it. I've been focused on it for the last 4 years, and I don't think there's anybody in the world that knows more about pickleball than me.
So let's go back to the beginning of pickleball, right? So pickleball, like you said, it is a game that has been around for a while, even though it's just burst in popularity within the last decade, especially. It's a game that most of us grew up playing in gym class. That was the first time I ever played. It had a funny name to go with it. It was active in like senior citizen communities, mostly in California and Arizona and Florida. How has it grown like a wildfire over the last 10 years now, and what prompted it?
Well, it really started, like you said. I mean, it started as an activity. I mean, it started in 1964 in Washington as something to do for the small family that the father didn't have anything to do with the kids, and they were complaining, and they were at their lake house. There's nothing to do, and the kids wanted something to do. So the father just threw this game together, and it was with an old badminton net and a wiffle ball that they had. And after the kids started playing, all the adults started getting addicted to it. This was in the 60s. And then in the 70s, it was just small cul-de-sacs in the Washington state area mainly. And more people were just flocking to this little new activity with no infrastructure. And let's fast forward 25 years. It took off for a while, and then it got introduced to the physical education department in 1983 or 2 in Cincinnati. And that's when we started seeing these people like us getting introduced to it through specific physical education teachers across the country that wanted to add that to their curriculum. And then in the late 90s, when all these retirement communities started popping up and a lot of the baby boomers started retiring, there was all these retirement complexes getting built in Arizona and Florida mainly, and they needed some social activities for these people to play and do. And pickleball started getting put in just as something to do, as just a less strenuous on your body. Less tennis was still exploding, but it was for the older population. Then, as more and more retirement communities popped up and people were loving pickleball, a lot of those grandparents' kids came and played when they went and visited, and they loved it too. And they were like, what's this pickleball? And there was very few people that knew what pickleball was in these other communities across the country. And they would go back home and they would play in their local, there would be a couple places to play at the Y or whatever. And it just kind of started exploding more and more. Then there was more and more retirement complexes added to pickleball. The ones that didn't have pickleball started putting pickleball, because the seniors, you really have to have a lot of time to play this sport. And then over the last 15 years, we started seeing more and more communities putting some pickleball courts in very small batches and areas. But other communities saw how much the public in those communities loved the sport, that more and more communities just kind of multiplied and followed other people's leads. And
was it people like going to Arizona, snowbirds from the Midwest, going to Arizona and Florida, playing pickleball with all the other blue hairs down there, and then coming back to the Midwest or wherever it be, the colder parts of the country, saying, we need pickleball courts here, or let's convert our old tennis courts that aren't getting used into pickleball courts? Is that essentially how it's grown then?
It kind of was like 10 or 20 people had their grandparents and they went and played. And then this was the early 2000s, and they would come back and they were the only ones in their whole town that knew what pickleball was. And then 5 or 10 more would know. And then 5 or 10 more. And then all of a sudden there was a group of 20 to 30 people that actually knew pickleball. And then they would start playing. And then all of a sudden it just spread like wildfire to more friends in that area. It would start with like 1 or 2 groups of people that would play at a tennis court. And then more and more people would start playing. And then all of a sudden, like Michigan is a great example. There's a lot of snowbirds that went down there. Grand Rapids turned into a huge hotbed for pickleball because there were so many people that just got introduced early from Arizona and Florida. And then a lot of those people kind of just spread out like wildfire.
You never see pickleball, or you never see a sport go from the elderly down to the young people. And that's what's happening in pickleball right now. It started with, your 70-year-old grandpa playing pickleball. And now we're seeing younger and younger people get into the game all the time. It's just something that you never see in sports.
And that's kind of the wave we just saw, the tidal wave just coming in. It was like I said, it was the kids of the original grandparents in the late 90s that are now in their 60s and 70s, but they would come back and they were 50, 60 years old and start playing. But it's so fun. It's the most amazing sport once you play it. It's like addicting. And all of a sudden, a couple more younger people got into it. But at the time, it had this major cliche. Oh, that's only for old people. That's only for... As more and more 40, 50-year-olds got in, then all of a sudden the 30-year-olds get in. And now we're seeing junior divisions and kids programs and people starting at 8 years old. And there's junior divisions, there's a next generation series, and schools are starting to pick up, colleges are picking it up, only because it's the opposite in most sports. Most like lacrosse, it started at a young age and it kind of trickled up. This one kind of came from the top and lower, and people had this cliche that it was only for older people. But once you play it and more young people picked it up, it just started catching on, and then COVID hit and it just took off.
So you mentioned colleges picking it up. Is this going to be something we start seeing played competitively in high school and college?
I have a different view, than a contrarian view than most people. Kind of like everybody talks about it being in the Olympics, and we're far out for that because you need to have a lot of exposure. I look at it more like lacrosse and things, and there needs to be a youth program that has a lot of competition involved and a lot more people competing, and to get a higher level. Right now, it's just a club sport in a few colleges. But the competition really isn't there. It's very unique. And everybody that's playing in that level is all beginners. They just started when they were in college. Same with the high school. You're going to have a couple high schools playing, and it's not really all the high schools in the area that have access to courts right now. Right now, it's only in smaller communities. So I see the youth development really starting to, then it'll be a youth before it goes to high school and college. I think college is more of a rec thing, but as far as the high level competitive atmosphere, we're going to see the youth. There's got to be some sort of a feeder program for that to happen.
Do we need a feeder program in pickleball, or will that just cannibalize tennis?
So everybody talks about the tennis and pickleball comparison, and that's what it's going to continue to talk about. Like, it's competing sports. They're really a much, much different sport, and it's going to come down to infrastructure before that even happens. There really needs to be access to the public in a lot of communities to play pickleball, where tennis, where I grew up, like we didn't even have a tennis team. It was more of the higher end places that had a tennis community and a tennis center
Yeah, it was a country club sport, right?
It was a country club sport. In pickleball, I see it being adapted and adopted way faster as soon as we're going to start seeing every single community when they have, everybody has a softball field and a basketball court and a tennis court. We're going to see more and more pickleball courts than the tennis courts. It takes less space and it's just easier to pick up. You don't have to be a high level athlete. I'm against pushing people into pickleball at a young age too much. If they're a tennis player, there's a lot of benefits from both sports that are a little bit more competitive. One requires a lot more athleticism, a lot more discipline and training in a different strength way, where pickleball is something that why I love it is you can be mentally disabled, physically disabled, short, tall. There's not really that many things that are going to make you much better than it's a big brain sport. And the physical skills can only take you so far.
Yeah, I agree with you totally there, because if you look at the top pickleball players in the world, almost every one of them was a really, really good tennis player prior to playing pickleball. And it seems like those skills are very transferable. You don't have to play tennis first, because pickleball is much easier to pick up, mostly because you don't need a great serve in pickleball like you do. I mean, tennis is so dependent on the serve, and you don't need that as much in pickleball. Now, the higher up you go, the more important the serve does get in pickleball. But I would love to see pickleball actually elevate tennis as well, and more people just continue to play racket sports in general.
That's a very good point. I think that is probably a better angle that I would like to support than people trying to take tennis, and you're either a tennis or a pickleball. I feel like pickleball is a great feeder program for the kids. Like when you play tennis, I'm not even a tennis guy, but at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they can get those skills by playing pickleball that you need for tennis, that the higher level athletes that can have that overpowering serve, that can do a lot of those things. You're going to start seeing, I think, the tennis community in 5, 10, 15 years benefit from this early feeder pickleball program, because still the top level athletes, and that's why we don't see pickleball as super, super competitive with the higher level tennis players. It's not as challenging athletically in a lot of ways. So there's no overpowering. And there's a lot of ego that comes into that too. They don't want to play pickleball because they can't show off their power. But the higher level athletes, and that's where I don't like to compare the two as much, but you brought up a great point. Pulling the pickleball skills and the racket sports and just the mental benefits you have from doing that type of sport is really why I'm so into it. It's almost like a meditation and doing an activity. But then tennis it's still seeing record numbers too, while this pickleball is blowing up.
Yeah, I love singles tennis, and part of it is for the ego. I just love unloading on the big serve, right? The big first serve, and then the serve and volley, and the workout that you get from playing singles tennis. But I would much rather play doubles pickleball than doubles tennis. And I believe that doubles pickleball is, to your point, it's one of the most fun things I've ever done in a tandem sport ever. It's just a blast. There's so much strategy. There's so much communication that's required. And it's unlike anything I've ever done before, even though to the novice, it looks very much like doubles pickleball, doubles tennis. It's much, much different.
Yeah, it's like the most basic one is chess and checkers. You don't just hop through, and it's not about how powerful you are. And the way you have to strategize and see your opponent's weaknesses and play against them, and the team aspect, you're literally only covering a 10 by 20 foot area, and your partner's right next to you, and you have to be communicating, and it's such a faster game. Plus the games only last 15 minutes, and you're at the net a lot of times. So there's this social connection that brings this endorphin production in your brain that makes it more fun, because it's also not one guy is going to overpower. One guy can do that, but it's really important to play with a similar skill set, and you can have points that just go on. And we're, like you said about tennis, it's a one-man serve. It could just go back and forth. In pickleball, it just is so many shots, and you're hitting a wiffle ball. that it's just the funnest thing I've ever done. It's crazy.
How good are you?
Pretty good. I'm a 5-0.
You are a 5-0.
Yeah.
So have you ever played like professional? Like, okay, explain to me this, I guess, Chris. Maybe here's the question. I talked to a lot of guys, and I've played against a bunch of guys that claim to be professional pickleball players. And I don't really know what that means. So I got to imagine you as a 5-0, you've probably played in some quote unquote professional tournaments. What does it mean to be a professional pickleball player?
So that's it. So 2 or 3 years ago, when I first started taking it serious, I played sports in college, and I know my role. I'm a D3 athlete. Okay. And you go to D2, D1, it's like a whole nother level. And I could see that this competition was coming in, and I was starting to get too much. Like, I do the sport it's almost like a rehab thing. It's just like so fun and a community thing. When I started taking it real serious, I get pissed if I didn't play up to my expectations. Yeah. And you get to these higher levels, and then you get real pissed because your whole worth is based on how well you do. So like being a professional pickleball player, I could be a professional pickleball player. You have to pay the amount of money to play in the professional tournaments. A lot of the guys I play with play in the pro tournaments. I just know that I'm never it's just a donation. Right. I played a couple of the top guys, Jay DeVilliers, Pat Smith, some of these big dogs. It's like they're taller, they're faster, they're played D1 tennis. There's no chance I'm going to ever make it a professional career out of this. And some people, you can have that competitive drive, but as soon as the return on your investment of this amazing activity starts to weigh on your ego, and you start to feel worse about yourself, because I think we're still just in the beginning. Like you said, I mean, the professional pickleball is going to be all ex-tennis players that are 6'4", 6'5", and the reach is there.
Right.
And it's something you can't teach.
To that point, it seems like there's a lot of money getting poured into the sport right now. We've seen it in the news, Major League Pickleball, Kevin Durant, Tom Brady, LeBron James, they all own pickleball teams now. What's going on here? Like, what is the next 5 years of professional pickleball going to look like? So
professional pickleball and pickleball are two different animals to me. This is my opinion and how I see it. I think pickleball is going to be bigger than golf and tennis combined. Okay. That's a bold statement.
Whoa. That is a really bold statement.
I said that 3 years ago, and people thought I had three heads, and it is a bold statement, but it's just because I look at the population, how many people can play versus not play, how it's free. But you had some billionaires come in this year. Last December 31st was the first time Tom Dundon, who owns majority owner of Top Golf, and he's the sole owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, NHL. And then Steve Kuhn, who's a multi-billionaire. What happened is these guys they played it. They loved it. They got addicted to it. It wasn't because they saw it as a business. They were just like, holy shit, this is the amazing sport. And the same reason why we see Kevin Durant in it, same reason Drew Brees has got in, same reason Tom Brady. A lot of these players, Kid Rock plays every morning. He has a pickleball court in his house. His buddy comes over and he plays pickleball. Okay. What I saw is this sport is so fun and it caters to everybody. Once you play it, you're like, holy cow, this is amazing. And then they want to get invest into it.
So do you think
it's a passion project? The professional scene is just in these big names. So the billionaires kind of leverage this awareness. It's about building awareness in this industry and let people not deal with their, the cliche of it's only for old people. And it's more of using those names to build the communities that will grow the awareness and all across the country. More players means more viewers, means more sponsors, means more advertising dollars, which means more pro players and more competition. So as that's happened the last 2 years, I mean, we were going to tournaments and you play with the pros. I mean, they made $2,000. They made no money. They would fly somewhere. They'd stay on a couch and play play each other every weekend. Not even do it. They did it for the love of the game. That's the beauty of this sport. And
so for a lot of years, we've heard like this is the sport of the future, whether it was soccer, they've been saying about soccer for 40 years now, lacrosse, the golf with Tiger Woods, was going to be the takeover thing. And now you're saying with, I guess, BMX racing and skateboarding in the X Games after that. And now you're saying it's pickleball. How do we know that this isn't just a fad?
I'll tell you, everything you just mentioned is a specific type of person that even has the ability to do that, and then the access to do it and the means to do it. Okay. So the ability is the first thing. You can have one arm and be deaf and play pickleball. You can have no money and be physically disabled and play pickleball. You can never play golf, BMX racing. Those things require a certain skill set that you have to be able to do to be able to play in it. The majority of pickleball players, I would have to, it's a question now, but didn't come from any sports background at all. Never played a sport in their entire life. They've never even had something that they could play. And this, like the 40 to 50 to 60-year-old women is probably the biggest demographic of this sport that don't play golf. They don't do BMX. They can't do football. They can't do tennis. These people. So it's the first activity that allows them to compete at something that they've never, ever had the access to, an ability to compete at. And the fact that it's free allows that growth that's way more unlimited than those other sports that are limited. You can play this in your garage,
Is this an American only game? Just 20 minutes ago, I was Googling top pickleball players in the world. The top 10 are all American. And in the doubles scene, 9 of the 10 teams are American, with the 10th being Canadian. So you got to imagine that, racket sports are huge over in Asia. The Europeans love tennis. So I'm surprised that like America seems to be the one that's really grabbing this sport right now.
Well, that's just all typical business. Like everybody follows the Americans in the beginning. Australia is a huge hotbed right now. The Mexican countries are huge right now. China's starting to pick up. Europe's got there's a huge following there, but they're 20 years behind us. This sport takes a lot of practice. That's the beauty of it, and why you can't just be really athletic and come in and dominate. It takes a skill. It takes a lot of touch. I'll tell you, in 5 to 10 years, the Asian community is going to take over this entire sport. There's 100 million badminton courts in China. It's the same exact size court as a pickleball court. It's just awareness. And that's what this whole part of this professional pickleball scene is. The more awareness that the people bring in the US, then Europe follows it, which is already happening. Tons and tons of more pickleball people in Europe, but they're only 2 years in, 3 years in. I mean, it takes a year or two, no matter how good you are, to just learn, and then you're only as good as your competition. We have a way bigger advantage right now for our players that you have to play against high level players to get better. So, that's where the Olympic conversation is not in the deck of cards yet. I think they'll use it as a couple exhibit, like I forgot what they call it in the Olympic realm. But you have to have 75 countries that have widespread active participation in that country to allow it to be an Olympic sport. There has to be enough competition and enough of the citizens to be able to practice that skill. So that's my long-winded answer to that question.
So I want to unpack your golf. It's going to be bigger than golf and was it tennis combined?
Yep.
In what's the time frame on this prediction?
I think it'll be 2033.
So 10 years from now,
yep.
You think it's going to be that big? what growth in the United States has to happen in the next 10 years for that prediction to be true, other than pickleball just continue to flourish on the trajectory that it's on right now?
Well, I was saying this 3 years ago when I ran all the numbers, looked at the activity. I mean, we have 250,000 tennis courts in the country that are, and a lot of them are underutilized. You can get 2 pickleball courts from the current infrastructure. But then about 8 months ago, Steve Kuhn, the billionaire who owns the MLP, he came out with a 40 by 30 project. 40 million people by 2030 will play. Okay. That was the
about
first
10% of the American population at that point.
That was the first time I saw someone make a bold claim that was even close to where I saw. Okay. It comes down to awareness and the availability to play. Every single community in the entire country allocates property taxes to their public health. And that's why there's softball fields and there's basketball courts, and a lot of the grants that are supplied for this infrastructure based on the communities is coming from tax dollars. So the growth of this sport is unlike hockey or lacrosse, where there needs to be private investment only. And it's only for a specific part of the community that competes in this sport. So we're going to see so much public investment on top of these billionaires that are bringing in this sport in the awareness side of things and the availability. But I think it's the number one public health solution to our country for physical and mental health. And that's where the federal government gets involved. That's where the state government gets involved. So that's the infrastructure is why I'm so boldly confident in that. And not boldly, that's a far-fetched, opinion. But I look at how it caters to 5-year-olds to 100-year-olds. Literally, there's 90-year-olds that play pickleball. Every single demographic. It's the most inclusive sport I've ever seen, where you can have different incomes, different careers, different genders, in every single demographic category there is. It just caters to all of them.
In 2030, when 10% of the American population is playing pickleball, what role is Chris Rossi going to play within the larger pickleball world? Because I got to imagine, like, listening to you preach the gospel of pickleball here, if pickleball is bigger than golf and tennis in 10 years, you're probably going to be the guy that was like, I told you. And you're going to be the White House's Arnold Schwarzenegger to pickleball at that point.
I mean, the beauty is, and why I also got involved, is I'm one of thousands of people that are so into this. And this is where I talk about the army of, like, when you read the book Tipping Point, how epidemics and pandemics start. And it's just, there's so many people like me where it's changed my life. How I got into this was I left Wall Street after 10 years. And I realized, and I quit drinking alcohol. And I see this big problem with so many people having this sense of communication, ADD, depression, physical health, mental health. My whole goal with InstaDink, and what we have 100 other domains that we're going to have access to, but really just building the sense of community and helping people through pickleball change their life with the same skills that you use in pickleball, and why you get addicted to pickleball can do the same exact thing to your life and your relationships with your finances, whether it's your old life, you've got a divorce, whatever it is. I do this for the mental and physical benefits and physical education for the adults. And that's my goal.
So you mentioned InstaDink there. Tell the Moonlight Graham Show audience what InstaDink is. And I guess before we get to that, I just want to say I do get kind of sick of, I'm not sure if Colorado is the same way, but in Iowa, we're obsessed with vanity license plates where people can write whatever they want on their vanity license plates. And who plays pickleball, because every one of them has like some form of dink on the license plate, right? Like to dink, love to dink, dinking, all that stuff. And so that is like a pickleball only term, where it's like, if somebody has that on their plate, you know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah, so that's a good, thanks for bringing that up. So people that don't know pickleball, dink is everybody has that dink. So when I brainstormed a few of ideas, the first one, I'll give you some juice that nobody knows, was first of all, I want to do pickleball. I was sponsored by a paddle company out of Michigan. I started doing some business advice for them, and I realized that the consumers were getting ripped off in a lot of different ways. As this pickleball industry has exploded, a lot of greed and money has come in, and people just trying to take advantage of the consumer. And there was also no resources or access to any information about pickleball or what to do what to buy, how to buy it, what is good, what is bad. It was all just who was sponsored. So the first name I came up, I want to do a subscription. I had a lot of success in different businesses building small, unique brands through subscription boxes, which is introducing new brands to a high influencing consumer and taking out the advertising and the sales side of things and just introducing those consumers directly to those companies. And that's what I wanted to do, was bundle the products. My biggest pain point, I made this business for my biggest issue on pickleball, which was buying balls originally. It was just so hard to buy balls. They broke. I had to pay $30 for 10 of them, and it was just a pain in the butt. So I originally, with a business plan, was just to deliver balls with a couple other products monthly. And that original name was going to be Dink in a Box. Okay. But then I was like, I don't know how many females, which are probably going to be our main customer, is going to be sharing, hey, check out this Dink in a Box thing. So that's a separate business development in the future to introduce the youth generation, the younger people, as a starter kit, the Dink in a Box, just for the name. But InstaDink is the name of my platform, and it's a subscription box, but it's more a health and wellness platform, which we're going to be sharing content every single month. You get a newsletter, which we talk about a word of the month. The first month is consistency, when you just talk about how to become the life of a champion. That's our platform. And we have health of a champion, heart of a champion, fitness of a champion, and nutrition of a champion. And we just have different doctors and specialists and different people that provide education and stuff to read and educate the pickleball players about how they can control their physical health and their mental health by themselves through pickleball. It's so important to them. Pickleball is my little bait for them to actually care about these other things, that it's going to improve their pickleball game. So InstaDink is the platform that you get. It's more for the addicted pickleball player, but we also support the products, and you can buy that stuff on our site.
I love it. Well, Chris, I really appreciate coming on the podcast to talk pickleball. I love playing pickleball. So if you ever come through Des Moines, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not just saying this, I'm going to keep this in the podcast. I want you to call me up, and we're going to play pickleball against each other. And we'll talk about it on the pod, and I want to see how I'd measure up to you as a 5.0 guy yourself. I want to play you. I played a bunch of good guys here in town, but you're the guy. And so I want to see how I measure up to you.
100%. And if you come to Denver, let's go.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Sure. Well, that's a promise.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the pod. This has been a treat, man.
No, I appreciate you having me on. It was great. Hope this brings some more awareness and gets people playing some pickleball.
Absolutely. Let's dink it together.
All right. Just dink it.
Thank you for listening to our interview with Chris Rossi. As you guys can see, the guy is passionate about the sport of pickleball. Bigger than golf and tennis in 10 years. That is quite the statement. And I'm not sure I totally agree with him, but I am excited to watch the sport grow and see how it develops, and to make sure it's not just another fad. So one thing we talked about, Chris and I, was how the sport started off with old folks, and now it's getting younger and younger and younger. And just a few years ago when I was playing, I got a call on like a weekend that said, hey, on Tuesday over your lunch hour, would you mind coming down to the pickleball courts and practicing with this kid? And so sure enough, I go down there, and there's this kid named Grayson that is a homeschooled kid, and I believe he lived in Humboldt, Iowa, so north of Fort Dodge, and he would drive down to Des Moines like 3 to 5 times a week to play pickleball and to take private pickleball lessons. And so I met up with him and played with him for about an hour and a half over my lunch hour. I was just his practice partner while his coach was coaching him on the other side of the court. And at that time, he was like a high school age kid. He was like 16 years old, and I was playing pretty regularly at the time. So I was kind of whooping up on this kid and thinking like, man, this kid is kind of crazy to be instead of playing a high school tennis or whatever sport, he is driving down to Des Moines to take private pickleball lessons. And at that time, he was okay, but he wasn't anything to write home about. Well, sure enough, the kid keeps playing and he keeps playing and he keeps taking the lessons. And just a couple of years later, I saw him again, and I couldn't believe how much better he had gotten. And he had gotten to the level where now he plays professionally. Like he's one of these young professional pickleball players that travels around the country to professional tournaments in Florida and in Arizona and in Las Vegas and all over the place. And I remember I was practicing with him when he was just getting his start as a 16-year-old. And now I believe he's like 19, maybe 20 years old, and he's a professional pickleball player. If you want to look him up, his name is Grayson High School. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Heiskell. Grayson High School or He School. And so look him up on Instagram. I know he has an account over there. And I'd like to get him on the podcast just to talk about his progression in the sport as well. So if you're looking for a pickleball guy to follow Grayson. He's got a tie to the Moonlight Graham Show. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Thank you to the Moonlight Graham Show team as well. Brendan, Brian, Andy, Tommy, Neil. And have a great week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.